thank you everybody for making time this morning to come out and hear this conversation. Is this one on too? I'm one that likes to move around, and there we go. I want to echo this. Whoa, Nelly. I want to echo the sentiments of and congratulate the team from NOAC. And Brian, your comment about environmental stewardship. I'm going to kind of wrap some of this around with some of these presentations we heard this morning with Green Chairman in the room. And hearing, most of you have maybe some social media presence, or you are out promoting the work that you do on your golf course. The fact that you're presenting environmental reward is really good. We heard earlier this morning about some of the new regulations that might be forthcoming and how they're targeting specific things, golf courses specifically. We hear about WOTUS and what WOTUS could do. I read the regulations for when WOTUS was first released, and then ultimately it went through the appeal process, was shot down. Anything that you can do at your club from a stewardship standpoint, but also promoting it, is really going to help the long-term benefits of the golf industry. Because if we are being attacked in many ways at the environmental or at the political level, anything that you can do to start to sort of sway opinions in a different direction is really good. We see a lot of films of people aerifying on Twitter. How about seeing some bees flying around, or seeing some wildflowers, seeing some things that are really going to be beneficial to clubs. Those are the things that are going to help our industry in the long term. So, past and present trends in golf course restoration and renovation. Anytime you give an architect a microphone, we really can run with things. This was a lot of fun to look into. Obviously, having been with Forse Design for 25 years, we do a lot of this work. You might hear me say we this morning, or I, or anything. It's pretty fresh, pretty recent, so some of the things I'm going to talk about are things that Ron and I worked on, and other things that I've been managing for a number of years. But let's just start from the beginning. What really is a restoration? It's a representation or reconstruction of the original form. Easy enough to understand. A renovation is to make new. Now we have projects that are almost a combination of them. Some people are calling them restovations. So we'll touch on that a little bit, but there's no true definition for a restoration. Renovation pretty much dominated the golf scene from the earliest beginnings here in the United States. And as I started to formulate this presentation, I started realizing that these trends really started to evolve and change as the game grew, as the equipment changed. Things were sort of forced on the architects of the time, or the golf courses of that time, that presented or created these new trends. But past renovation trends, what we really start with, if you can see these photos, this is Springhaven Club outside of Philadelphia, which dates back to the late 1890s. And in these photos, you see a lot of little dolomite mounds, berms. This place even had, and there's speculation, were the church pew bunkers inspired by this little club outside of Philadelphia because some of the features that they had. But yet, of course, in the late 1890s, as golf evolved, the trend was changing to something you see here in the 1930s, where we moved away from steeplechase architecture and we got into more strategic play. The game was changing, but more importantly, an article from 1914 where it indicates the course was, number one, was extended 60 yards. Another hole was turned into a long two-shotter. Number four, extended 100 yards. 1914, we've never stopped chasing distance. It's never ended, 110 years later. But these were the types of renovations that you were seeing. We could get into all the reasons why and who the architects were, and Fred Pickering was the brother-in-law of William Flynn, and he pulls him out of Vermont and brings him to Marion. I love that stuff. But that's really not focusing in on some of the trends and the evolution of the game. And how we sort of, what does that mean for you guys if you're going to start to undertake a project? I didn't really think about this when I put this up there, because Mackenzie's railing against Green Chairman, but in reality we see, even in the earliest times, Alistair Mackenzie saying it's strange that a committee consisting of doctors, lawyers, architects, and engineers who no doubt recognize the importance of mental training and experience in their own professions attach so little to the importance of golf. The interesting thing was, Ron Forse and I are standing on the 10th fairway at Newport Country Club, a host of a USGA championship this year. And we looked at the fairway line, and we looked at our plan, and looked at the fairway line, looked at the plan, thought, these do not match. And Ron says, who painted this out? And Bob Reynolds, the past superintendent who had since passed, he says, a lawyer a mortician, an insurance guy, and a doctor. So not much has changed. But then the history of most clubs is that a committee is appointed, they make mistakes, and just as they are beginning to learn by these mistakes, they resign office and are replaced by others who make still greater mistakes, and it still goes on. Stephen Kay over here works at Squires. I love the story at Squires where they have a president every year, all-male club. And I think the one president must have been losing shots every year on the 13th hole. And so he puts a pond in. Now he's going to gain some shots back. New president comes in the next year, guess what? Pond gone. You know, you want to have consistency. You want to make sure that you're working with your architect, you're working with your superintendent, you're working with your team, and not making it about yourself as your time as green chairman. Thoughts on distance. Love this one, 1927. Again, the question of the ball has a great bearing on what type a certain length hole will be. Time was, and not so many years ago, when a 400-yard long, on average ground was a good two-shot hole for the star players. Now the same hole is perhaps a drive and spade for better class of golfers. All architects will be a lot more comfortable when the powers that be, this table over here, solve the golf ball problem. A great deal of experimentation is now going on, and it's to be hoped that before long a solution will be found to control the distance of the elusive pill. It's 1927. Fast forward just 10 years. Flynn's back at Philadelphia Country Club because they're getting ready to host the 1939 Open. Flynn then classifies it not as just being the ball, it's the change in the shaft, and also the fact that amateur, professional, and then they cross out and he adds amateur, golfers are changing their physical and mental abilities to play golf. In 1939, they played the US Open at about 68.50, par 69, one par 5. And so how does this work with the trends? You can see the same trends that we have today in restoration and renovation were the same that they saw a long time ago. More people were playing. The equipment was constantly changing. Playing conditions were changing. I have an article that talks about Donald Ross laying out 9 holes for the Pico Company at McCall Golf Club, and they said they planted it to field grass. Many years later, we're not using field grass anymore. And then we were getting realistic greens. We were doing a lot of changes in conditioning. Things evolved, and therefore the designs involved. For you to understand, and when you walk out on your classic golf course, and many of you have done work in the past, but to understand why are these trees here is to look to the past and understand what was going on at that time that might have dictated those changes. This is Lancaster Country Club. William Flynn started working there in 1919. This is only about his 5th commission golf course, but yet he spent 26 years working there. It's a fascinating study to see how golf architecture evolved from the teens to his time when he passed away. He worked at Lancaster until he died. And so you really see the evolution of the game, the expectations of a membership, as well as how equipment and maintenance was also impacting play, where you go from a golf course that was essentially contained here to then spreading into a different portion of the property as clubs needed more land to develop tennis, to put in pool. So it's not always about that a ball or equipment or player abilities were affecting the golf course and renovations. It was also how the club itself was growing from a facility standpoint and how that impacted what needed to be done. One of the big things A.W. Tillinghast, look at this, literally in a year, almost a year's time, 197 golf courses. Many of you may have those records of your golf course where Tillinghast toured for the PGA of America and made recommendations on his own golf courses, eliminating those bunkers that were right off of tees, or changing positions of bunkers, or changing things to become more maintainable. He railed against some of his own architectural decisions from 10 and 15 years prior to make changes. So now you see some courses, and I saw this at Tavistock in southern New Jersey when we worked there, walking the property and thinking, man, why are those bunkers there? They're in a very odd spot. They don't look like anything in these old photos. And then all of a sudden we find a report of Tillinghast visiting there, and he called out these spectacle bunkers. And so they put the spectacle bunkers in. The biggest challenge then was, in the 1930s, we're still sort of in a Depression era. The Depression era, you don't have a lot of golf course contractors, but you still had a lot of superintendents who were sort of these Scottish, Irish-born guys, and they did stuff in-house. And so you might see some bunkers on your property that just, before you've done any renovation, that just don't look right. And a lot of times they were built in-house. We're in the midst of rebuilding Philadelphia Country Club. We begin phase 2 in August, and there were bunkers that were built in-house for the 39 Open that hadn't been touched. And I mean, you could just tell they didn't look like the rest of the golf course. Some of it goes back to this era. William Flynn again, Golf Committee report to the Board of Governors. Mr. Flynn, who was the architect for the Spring Mill course, went over it May 17th and made several suggestions for its improvement. He feels that with our opportunities and our basic plan, a few refinements will give us much the best course in Philadelphia. Of course, this excludes Pine Valley. The improvement would be comparatively inexpensive. Flynn's recommendations were to add traps to 9 holes and lengthen 8 holes. Okay? So you still have a number of classic courses, especially, as I say, in the I-95 corridor from Philly up through Boston, where these classic architects were still very much involved with their projects, making changes. And so these are the earliest trends. Length, changing out features or adding features because of how a course was played. And in some instances, even here at Philadelphia Country Club, within 3 years of the course opening, they rebuilt their greens because they were not happy with the conditions of some of the greens. It had more to do with some of the subsoil conditions. And so a lot of that focus, the early stuff, was evolving and changing from the rudimentary short course designs, centrally located around a metropolitan area. Maybe they moved a course and built a whole new one, or they renovated existing and made them longer and more strategic and interesting. We start to progress on time here, and we get the impact of the Great Depression and World War II. Many golf courses were left unmaintained. That's certainly going to have an impact then once they start maintaining them again. Labor force, we talk about labor force now, but if you have an entire population of a large population of the male workforce fighting a war, you know your labor force is going to be much less. Financial struggles for clubs and courses, fuel shortages and rationing affected maintenance and course design. This becomes the first impact that we start to see on fairway width and green sizes as they start to cut back on things. Why is it that the plateau of this particular green looks like it's about 7,000 square feet, but I've got a 3,000 square foot pie plate in the middle of the green that's all on slope, but everything around it's flat. This is where the process started, okay? So fairway widths are impacted, green outlines, maybe some bunker removals, or they just, the bunkers just grow over and they never put them back in. These are the things that start to evolve. One of the greatest impacts, this is not confirmed, this is sort of speculation, but when I start looking at the dates of photos that we have and understanding the correlation of the Civil Conservation Corps, one of the greatest impacts to golf courses, and I should say may be in the form of the post-Depression movement to plant trees throughout the United States. This was a result of the Dust Bowl that deepened the Depression. This initiative was implemented by Franklin Delaware Roosevelt. Sorry, I need to drink water. So with that, we have so many photos in our archives that show tremendous amounts of plantings in the mid to late 30s. And that's what a lot of you have inherited on your golf courses. Tree management programs are certainly improving, but a lot of this started at that time. Philadelphia Country Club, literally at that same time. They have great notes down there. Green Committee meeting minutes from April 38. Also, 4,000 seedling evergreens have been ordered for $25. Now, how much thought do you think was put into those 4,000 trees? Absolutely none. We see it all over the place. In some ways, public works projects were used to employ people, even to plant these trees. So just imagine taking a box of saplings, however they might have come, and giving it to one of the lowest guys in your maintenance crew and say, here, plant the golf course. They're not going to stand back on a tee and look and think, wow, you know, if I plant a tree there, it's going to, no. They're just going to go right down the line, okay? And so you still see a lot of courses impacted because of that. The results of those 4,000 trees at Philly, the more I started looking at this photo, I was like, that's the wrong photo. It actually doesn't look that bad. But what you can see they started to do, filling in a lot of void areas, but what you can't see are a lot of these small ones. There's a tree planted right in front of a bunker, but yet the tee's over here. You won't even see into that bunker eventually, you know. And so, I don't know if I should mark this as a point of pride or what, but we were standing on the 14th tee a couple years ago, which is in the upper right-hand corner, Superintendent Mike and I, and he says, Jim, there's the last pine. I left one. I said, why'd you leave one? He says, well, then they can't say I cut them all down. And it's not standing anymore. So, but you can see what a lot of courses inherited because of that. So, post-World War II and the dawning of a new era of design. So, the trend, lengthen courses, strategic elements, do all of these things. But now we're dealing with courses that have shrunken. Enter the scene, Dick Wilson and Robert Trent Jones Sr. Okay? Both of them classically trained in the sense Robert Trent Jones Sr. comes out of Stanley Thompson School of Architecture, Dick Wilson working for William Flynn. Two great architects. They really didn't get along, but two different schools of architecture also. So Dick Wilson, heavily influenced by William Flynn, begins renovations of many great classic era courses. But his philosophy is changing because the game is changing, and he sees golf as being played in the air versus the run-up approaches and all this stuff. In fact, Dick Wilson's famous quote was, if you want to play a game on the ground, go bowling. So he then starts to change and modify these golf courses. So instead of having these, he's very much about strategic angles, but he was also very much about approach shots into greens being not run-up, but full carries. So you can start to see some of his early work at Scioto, Seminole, Inverness, and Marion, to name a few. Then you get Mr. Jones. The big break and the big change coming with Mr. Jones is Oakland Hills secures the 1951 US Open. They hire their original architect, Donald Ross, to do a renovation, much like Philadelphia Country Club brings in William Flynn. So Ross starts putting a plan together. The problem is he dies. 1946, as he's putting the plan together, they're trying to plan for this, and he passes away. Mr. Jones comes in and adopts a different philosophy and says, I'm kind of going to go a different direction. Architectural, you know, there's an architectural evolution occurring, so he decides to do something different. And we sort of usher in this open doctor philosophy, because then he just went on this run of renovating a lot of golf courses. So the trend moved away from some of these strategic plays and adopted some of the philosophies of Robert Trent Jones Sr. He liked to elevate tees. It gave players confidence to be looking down on things. He moved bunkers and changed their perspectives and where they were at. He pushed things more to the side as opposed to these strategic carries and risk and reward. So the trend was more of a design thing and moved away. The four most impactful trends to affect golf courses sort of during this era. One, and I hope you can see it, but this is a 1956 aerial, single row irrigation system being installed on a course outside of Cleveland. Right down the middles. Just massive kickers throwing water out to the perimeters of fairways, or hoping they do. But now you get a single row irrigation system, so instead of having these 120, 130 foot wide fairways, shrunken during the Depression, irrigation might shrink that even more. Couple that with the tree planting that's going on, now all of a sudden your playing corridors are starting to get narrower and narrower. Okay? Secondly, the advent of the golf cart, the necessary evil in golf, in the 1950s, and you can just see all of these cart paths winding in and around this place. The beautiful thing about golf is now, you used to always talk about wall-to-wall cart paths. There's a lot of plans where I'm doing now, where I'm working on, where it's tees and greens and par threes. And anywhere, even yesterday I visited a club where we were talking about absolute elimination. All elimination except for some low-lying wet holes. So things are changing, evolving there. The other thing, mowing equipment in the mid-1960s, we started to see the advent or the use of the riding mower. So this is a project outside of Cleveland. You can see the green expansion, beautiful Hugh Allison golf course. But before the green was expanded, the cupping area started inside that red line. And so here again, many of you have gone through the process, but for those of you that may not have, you might have a lot of square footage sitting out there that's unused. And a lot of times what has happened, especially on a great classic golf course that might be sloping from back to front, there's a lot of slope in the middles of the green. And now all of a sudden you're talking about, I'm rolling greens at 11 and a half, 12, Pittsburgh's going 14. It's nuts. You're losing all that cupping area. But yet you could look at some greens and say, wow, if I expand that, I got 20 feet back left, but it's dead flat. And then all of a sudden there's a little knob out there 20 feet away, probably part of the original green. Look for those, you know. Great example, Jonathan's here. I haven't seen a photo of 16 lately. Can we talk to Cavalier and get a photo of 16 at Sleepy Hollow up there? But Sleepy Hollow's photo, that 16th green, that's constantly John Cavalier from Links Gems puts it up there. It's beautiful. It is a wonderful example of what tree management and green expansion will do for you. Just a great example. The tree planting, another thing that impacted golf courses. Tree planting on a massive scale. Plantings to screen one golf hole from the adjacent hole. This is a project outside of Chicago. When I first visited there, it may have been the most heavily planted golf course that I personally have been on. The interesting thing, I was talking to somebody about this presentation, and they said, you know, Jim, they said in some ways, you could almost liken golf architecture to housing architecture right now. Where when houses, you know, you build a house in the 40s or 50s, post-World War II for a long, long time, you had walls separating every room, doors separating every room. The living room and dining room may have been the only one that had a wider breezeway through them, but the kitchen was closed off, every room was closed off. You very rarely could see from one room into the next. Fast forward now, and you have great rooms, you have open floor plans, from living room to dining room to kitchens. Golf is much the same. There was a period of time when nobody ever wanted to see the neighboring hole. And even to the point of planting behind greens, we need that depth perception. You know, thankfully we have rangefinders now. But the nice thing is, architecture and tree management has moved to the point that we're getting away from this. And it's often driven by member expectations, maintenance conditions, expectations of maintenance and the standards that we have, and we've recognized in every case, and I hope the agronomists will agree with this, in every case, the tree's gonna win, okay? The grass is not. This course out here is actually a wonderful example. One of Tillingham's last courses that he built, private clubs, routed through essentially a forest here. And just majestic oaks out here. But I know through the years, we've had the pleasure of working here when I was with Forse Design, that it can be a challenge out there. But you know, things evolve and change, and trees, one of the biggest impacts to golf course design. So now, the dawning of the restoration era. In the I actually didn't insert this slide. If anybody here knows Ron Whitten, Ron filled me in with a little bit of information the other day. It was really good. Because we always talked about the dawning of the restoration era being late 1980s, and Rhys Jones is commissioned with doing work at the Country Club at Brookline. And a lot of people sort of use that as this is the beginning of restoration. And I was talking to Ron Whitten, he says, Jim, you got to back up 10 years. And you have to understand the rest of the story. He said, in the late 1970s, George and Tom Fazio are commissioned with developing plans for both Oak Hill and Inverness. And during the process of developing the plans, a decision is made to depart from the original bunker styles. And as he told me, Tom Fazio told Ron Whitten, you know, the bunkers were really hard to maintain. So he said, we were going to depart from the Ross style and create something new that was easier to maintain, but then they also made some architectural changes, okay? And so they did that at both of these projects. So 10 years goes by, and we'll just hold that thought. So in 1981, marks the first edition of the Golf Course book, The Golf Course, by Jeffrey Cornish and Ron Whitten. The book is edited in 1987 and includes a lot of updates. But it's during this time that people get a hold of this book, and it lists all the architects and their projects and a little sort of summary of who that person was. People start connecting the dots and start reading this information and start understanding a little bit more of who Flynn was, who Robert White was, you know, who some of these lesser known guys were. And all of a sudden there starts this groundswell of information, and people are intrigued by this. Ron Pritchard, 1982, he finds a plan by William Langford for the Texarkana Country Club. And he says, I need to do something here, but he's like, he told me, he says, he's not 100% sure what it really is, but he feels inclined to restore what's on the plan. And he's not, as he says, I'm not immensely proud of what I did at Texarkana these days. He was still trying to figure out what he was doing and how to do it properly. Then, just a few years later, Rhys Jones gets to work at the country club at Brookline. And Mr. Jones actually goes back and references the work that was done in the late 70s by the Fazios and says, I don't want to do that. Within that period of 10 years, their work had not been received as well. So he then begins to go undertake this process of restoration. So if we think about the development of American golf architecture really starting, or American golf starting in the late 1880s, we have 100 years before we really start to even consider this word restoration. And even at that time, it starts to take a little bit longer to catch on. 1989 marks the formation of the Donald Ross Society. Right or wrong, for the basis of its formation, it begins to influence the restoration of Ross and other courses, okay? Projects begin to take on a more authentic appearance. But at the same time, we still are lacking some of the information that we have today. The early 90s ushered in a new group of architects designing new courses, but also laying the foundation for what restoration will look like. And much like Ron Pritchard's comment, not 100% happy with the work, and working through maybe what won't work in the future. And so you get the likes of Rhys Jones, and Tom Doak, Ron Forse, Bruce Hepner, Pritchard, Silva, Hans, Corin Crenshaw, Keith Foster, Fazio, Stephen Kay to a degree. You were on the forefront of all of this work.
But just if I may.
Yes.
In 1989, I was hired by Hempstead Golf. Prior to that, it was bunker here, bunker there.
Yes.
There. 1989, Oyster Harbor in Cape Cod.
Wonderful Donald Ross Golf Course.
Hired me, and they committed to a 3-year renovation, 606, to redo all the bunkers. They all had photographs. Donald Ross, Oyster, Tillinghast, Hempstead, and we were going by those photographs to try to put the bunkers back to what they were.
Yep.
1989.
So you can see the timing of all of that. And so, but the problems, and Oyster Harbor, if you ever have a chance, Oyster Harbor is maybe the best set of 18 Ross greens you'll find anywhere.
Absolutely right.
Really good. Right. But the photos that we really had available to us that time were not as extensive as what we have right now, okay? And so a lot of times, there was this guy named Craig Disher, and Craig you'd pay him a small fee, and he'd go into the National Archives, and he'd pull out an aerial photo of your golf course, and that's where we started looking at how we restore golf courses. And maybe some clubs had some ground level photos, but now all of a sudden we started to find more original plans, the Tufts archives for Donald Ross. Milorganite, Michigan State owns these. massive tours through the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. They're now sitting at Michigan State. You can go online and find those things. The Dahlin collection of photos from the Hagley Museum down in Philly. Now, scanned newspaper articles. Newspapers.com, great resource. I've found so much information on some of these things, even to the point the sports writers at that time were so good and so descriptive that they would be there for opening days of private clubs and explaining each hole and how it was played and where bunkers were positioned. Really good stuff. And more importantly, archives and plans held by descendants of architects. I just found out recently, I've never seen a full-blown plan for a project we've been on, Manufacturers Golf and Country Club. All of a sudden, a descendant of Hugh Wilson has that plan. I mean, it's really good. When we started working here, can you really make out this photo? I hope you answered no, because this is the photo that we had to really start in on the restoration of Alpine Country Club, 1947. We literally had to have a magnifying glass just to try and pick up some of the features because it was not very clear. But this is the type of stuff that we had to work with until things started to get updated more and more. So, that doesn't really touch on the trends, but the trends are growing. The restoration is growing. Like Stephen said, bunkers here or there. That's where a lot of restorations started in the late 80s, early 90s. People were not nearly as aggressive. Then, we start to see people like Brad Klein, Jeff Shackelford, Tom Doak wrote a book, George Batto, the classics of golf. That was like Columbia House records for me. And I'm in college, spending any spare money on getting some book from the classics of golf. Jim Finnegan, Mike Hurdson, Bob LeBance. These guys start writing about the history of architecture. And we're getting more information on Ross and Tillinghast and all these guys. So the earliest date forms of restoration seem to focus primarily on bunkers, green expansions, maybe some modest fairway expansions. Why? Because people love trees, and they didn't really want to cut down their trees. And then what happened? Oakmont. Now, not telling everybody they need to become Oakmont, because I had to present a plan in Ohio right after this was revealed, and the first question when you make a presentation, the first question is always, how much? Not that day. The first comment was, you're turning us into Oakmont. And I said, no, absolutely not. Oakmont is Oakmont, and what they did is amazing. But that's Oakmont, okay? And you can see the tree planting that was there at Oakmont. I mean, this was so controversial, they had to do it at night. You know, think about that. But it started making people think, okay? Then the other one, not a lot of people talk about this one. Brian showed that photo earlier of his two daughters playing golf down at Fountainhead. Well, Carl Olson, and some of you may know him, Carl Olson was out walking his daughter over the grounds of National Golf Links. And they had their dogs, but they were walking in the tree line, inside the tree line. And he's like, why is there sand over here? But it's not just sand. There's a formation of something there. And so he goes to his green chairman and he says, you know what? I actually think there used to be some bunkers over here. Do you mind if I tackle some things here? So Carl just started clearing and pushing the corridors wider. And so here was not something like Oakmont that happened overnight. Not a lot of people have the pleasure of being able to walk National Golf Links. And they probably don't care if anybody walks National Golf Links. But he slowly started this whole restoration of that golf course. And he did it basically in-house, okay? So what's the impact of Oakmont and NGLA? A new way of approaching projects. Wider playing corridors, expanded fairways. Big thing. If you've got a classic course, you don't start at the tee and go to the green. You start at the green and you work your way back. And you start looking at the strategies and the angles. Start using that to develop what your restoration plan is going to look like. Okay? A reintroduction of angles of attack. The influence of wind. All of a sudden, These guys didn't route golf courses just because this is what it felt like. They used the influence of wind also on the game. More aggressive green expansions. You cut down trees, you can actually push greens back further and expand them. Bunker reinstatements previously not considered because they were out in the trees. Maintenance and restoration, how does that work together? Tying the two of them together. And then in-house versus large scale. There's not just one way to approach a project. National Golf Links was essentially in-house. Oakmont, although a lot of the tree removal was in-house, it kicked off another big restoration there. And so you started to see there is a possibility of how you could attack some of these projects. So, modern era. How am I doing?
15.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So the modern era. So coming out of that first restoration movement, the trend then starts to evolve and change. At the same time, you're getting renovations. Renovations could be blowing up an entire golf course and just starting over, doing many different things. But now, where are we now? Brian touched on it earlier. The post-COVID boom still is not slowing down. I've not personally seen it in the industry since I started in the early 90s. Stephen might be able to say differently, but the boom right now is unbelievable. I think we're all taking on projects because we think it's got to stop soon, but right now it's not. Because right now we're seeing a trickle down, okay? A trickle down with clubs who typically passed on larger projects now adopting plans to implement changes. We're seeing it, we're getting calls from clubs that typically would not hire an architect to do some of the work, or they would bring us in for a day, much like a USGA visit, walk the golf course, make some recommendations, and then we never see them again. Less of that. They're calling in to do plans, and they're setting aside capital funds to do work, okay? Seeing more projects in the 10 million plus range, some exceeding 20 million. Those used to be, I don't know, 1 out of every 50 project it seemed like in the past. Those numbers are increasing more and more. And clubs are doing full-blown infrastructure rebuilds. I think some are going beyond what they really need to, which is my opinion. But we're seeing massive scaled projects. Aggressive restoration with extensive fairway expansions and deepening of bunkers. We're seeing this trend currently. It might take a course from 25 acres of fairway and pushing it over 50, okay? And we're seeing bunkers deepened well beyond what they were ever intended. And you could say, well, is that restoration? Is that restoration plus, okay? Clubs are tackling more full-scale renovations in lieu of multi-phase projects over a period of time. I actually have clients that now, it used to be you closed the course if you were going to do a full rebuild, and you regrassed. Now clubs are actually closing just to do bunker projects and green expansions. They just want to give the contractor the time and the workspace to do that. This goes back to some of the conversations we had today. Weather, ability to get work done. If you are going to plan a renovation project and you think you're going to do it over the winter, those weather patterns that Garrett talked about, I actually haven't been to one of my client clubs for 6 weeks because the contractor literally can get nothing done. But the club said, we don't want to impact play, let's push the work till winter time. If they had given that contractor 3 more weeks on the front end, they'd be done now. Now we're going to start impacting the opening of the club because we don't know, the weather's too unpredictable. So just think about that when you ever start considering some stuff. We talked about maintenance today. You got to think about the construction. Irrigation work. My goodness, I don't know if I've ever seen this much irrigation work going on. And in many ways, the trend then is we're going to do an irrigation system. We need to update our master plan. Do not approach a project of being it's just irrigation. You have to couple that with at least looking at your golf course and master planning your golf course. So if you decide that a green needs to be expanded, it's accounted for. Or if you need to add a new bunker, all of a sudden you're not going to have to relocate a main line that you just put in 2 years ago. Make sure the two work together, okay? Some new varieties of bent grass, Bermuda and Zoysia, are allowing for implementation of new maintenance practices, design opportunities, and improved playing conditions. Tree management practices are much more widely accepted. Well-traveled and educated members and club leadership is opening the door to new possibilities for both restoration and renovation. What does that really mean? There's a lot of clubs where people never travel. And when you go in as an architect and try and promote fresh ideas and new ideas, they almost just push that stuff aside because they don't care. It's what works for their golf course. Now, we see people traveling more and more and seeing what's going on. Social media, all of these things, they seem more willing and open to new ideas than just the status quo. Superintendents are evolving and changing with member expectations and changing maintenance practices and opportunities. This does have an impact on what you can do on the golf course. Starting work with a new club in Pennsylvania that dates back to 1915. The superintendent didn't start then, but he's been there 40 plus years. And just sitting in a morning meeting with him and talking about how we could expand some greens and adjust some fairway lines, and I'm just getting pushback immediately. No, we can't do that. Why not? Well, because we've never done it that way. No, we can't widen fairways there. Why not? Well, because, you know, it was always no, because we didn't do it that way. Or no, because there was no willingness to come to a solution to find a new way of doing things. Superintendent, so it's rare to find that, but it's still out there. We're seeing a transition, the beginning of Restoration Plus. I talked a little bit about that and what does that mean, or the restoration. We're seeing a transition away from historic authenticity of some prominent courses. William Flynn died in 1946. Who cares what he, or 45? Who cares what he has to say? We hear that. But yet, unless you're going to reimagine your entire golf course, the fact that you are going to keep his greens tells you there's a certain way that that course needs to be designed. Okay? Construction processes and materials are allowing for very accurate representations of original work. I'll get to that. Beginning to see the reimagining of otherwise insignificant golf courses. So we're not just restoring courses, but now we're seeing courses that were built in the 50s up through the 80s just being reimagined is the word we use. Instances of both restoration and renovation where there's emphasis on difficulty in both the playability of the course and the associated maintenance. And then what I like to call Instagram architecture. Looks great from the air, looks great from a drone. How's it play? How's it maintained? You know, we still play golf on the ground. Modern construction methods, okay? Greens renovations, the technology we have available to us now with laser scanning, the ability to rebuild a green and expand it and pretty much capture everything that was originally there, but then expand that. Great resource if you have a wonderful classic course with great old push-up greens that are not draining or have failed or anything. 3D laser scanning. Bunker construction methods. The two leaders in the house seem to be Capcon and Better Billy, but they give you the ability to keep your bunkers around a lot longer. Yes, they are more expensive to maintain. Think about this. Bunkers currently cost more per square foot than a green to build. Just keep that in mind. And varying grass types and features. We got zoysia on a ditch in the upper right. We've got different types of fescue there on the left. And then down below we have a combination of Bermuda and fescue and zoysia, where it's allowing the architect the freedom to get a little bit more exaggerated. I apologize, the features here may not show up, but there's a lot of mounding ditches and ridges through here. So the grass types allow for more exaggeration of features and then being maintainable. Examples of current trends. Okay, this is a restoration, and so you can see with the progression, the old 1939 aerial to what it was to where we want to be, and this was rebuilt last year. Restoration of design intent, this is important. These three bunkers, okay? Just carried by everybody. But the ground allowed the ability to move those features and therefore bring them back into play. Do not force them. Do not find a spot that says, oh, I can move it here, but it doesn't fit the land. Make sure it works. And then renovation, where you're basically going through and just completely blowing up sort of what was there. You might be moving greens, widening fairways, adjusting bunker locations, cutting down trees. The renovation and that trend is still pretty strong. What to expect in the future? I'm going to try and fly through these so I can get onto the architect stuff. Where are we headed? Departure from the past. Who cares what Donald Ross had to say? He's dead. Less desire. And we are seeing this. As we move further away from something, we care less about it. But less desire to restore courses from lesser-known Golden Age architects. More architectural nuances of combining styles and interest and variety. We're seeing more collaboration. Since I made the announcement March 1, within a couple days, I actually had 2 people approach me about collaborating on projects. Shorter courses, and not only just shorter courses, new builds, but shorter courses within the existing courses, making them more playable for a larger cross-section of new golfers and existing. Reduction in total number of bunkers, yet equally interesting and challenging courses. Bunkers are becoming very expensive to build and maintain. To me, I call some of these things luxury items. I think we're going to start to see a rollback on some of these things with the extensive fairways and roll-off areas. You take a green and you got a tee 30 yards away and they're connecting it with bent grass. What's going to happen when we go to the next recession? Okay? And maybe I'm missing the point on that, but roll back on some of the luxury items in current renovation and restoration projects. Those items may not significantly impact construction cost, but do impact cost of ownership and time to maintain. Continued rebuilding of greens to keep up with maintenance practices and membership expectations. We will see the impact of municipal and county regulations impact projects and scope of work. We already heard that this morning. I could go into great detail. I will say this one thing. If you are planning a project and you think we're the club, we can do what we want, those days are dwindling. Talk to your local municipality, find out what it is you need to do. In most cases, if you explain it as being maintenance, we're rebuilding bunkers, you're good. But I've had projects stopped who are just doing bunkers. I've had projects where somebody drove by and we were just rebuilding a green and it was stopped. All it took was them making a call, put in a paper form, pay a couple $1,000, get back to work. But if you think those days of we can just do the work, they're dwindling quickly. Selecting a golf course architect. Okay, selecting the architect. When you want to get started with this process, do they have a good, thorough knowledge of the game of golf, its history, players, and design strategies? Do they understand budgeting and finances? I put a big emphasis on this. It's my opinion that when you hire a golf architect, you're not hiring a steward of your golf course, you're hiring a steward of your purse strings also. Because it's their job to help you spend your money wisely, and therefore even tracking or helping you understand what those costs are going to be over a period of time. Okay? Are they familiar with potential permits? And are they willing to assist in the process? We're not licensed from state to state and being able to submit them, but we should be able to be working alongside your engineer to make sure they have the proper information that's needed to get those permits. Okay? Do they have experience in public speaking, and can they engage a membership or committee? If you hire an architect that can't stand up and convince 300 people to educate them on why they need to develop a master plan or implement it, you're dead in the water from the very beginning. They need to be able to engage with that membership. Are they willing to listen? Are they a team player, or is it it's my way or the highway? Is it, this is what we're doing, don't question it, and oh, by the way, you get to maintain it when I'm done? Doesn't mean you're going to back off on architectural authenticity. It just means, are they a willing team player? Understands the complexity associated with, these are the things we have to understand: construction, planning, hydrology, civil engineering, plantings, agronomy, maintenance, drainage, and personalities. All of these are blended in one way or another during a renovation or restoration project. You know, Ron and I were talking one time, and Ron had been talking with Brad Klein, and he said, you know, Brad, boy, I really thought I was a shoe-in on that job. Brad Klein says to Ron, he says, Ron, you gotta understand something. Sometimes it just comes down to whether or not that person sitting across the table from you wants to go have a beer with you. And that's really what it is. Sometimes you develop these relationships, and it's whether or not they actually want to spend time with you outside of the work environment, because we do become very close with some of the people we work with. Able to write specifications and contracts, the ability to create a master plan, routing plan, grading plan, and bid documents. There's a lot involved in all this process. Why do you develop a plan? Start at the top. A golf course master plan is going to reveal the defects and challenges you have on your golf course. It's going to create relevance for a club, okay? You can generate publicity. It might give a member a sense of involvement to actually participate in developing a plan, or more than anything, the ability to just raise their hand and ask one of the stupidest questions they've had in their mind for a long time, but you answer it and they're good because they were heard, okay? Member involvement. Improving maintenance. A plan can dispel rumors. Oh my goodness, they're blowing the place up and spending $10 million. No, we're not closing it and we're only spending $2 million. Okay? Plan will reveal that. You could use it as a marketing tool. Keep you current in the market. Capitalize on your unique identity. Preserving features. Undoing past mistakes. It almost goes back to like slide 2 with the green chairmans. Okay? Some people, they really are, these rankings are really important to them. Okay? Smart financial planning. It gives you the roadmap for the future. The 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 7 year planning. Provides consistency. Greens chairmen change, presidents change, superintendents, pros, GMs, they change. If you develop a relationship with an architect, try and keep that one person consistent for a long period of time. That way you have something tied together that provides that consistency. It's a blueprint for the future. You can enhance overall aesthetics. There's so many reasons why you want to develop a plan. What are the hot button issues? This gets into priorities and establishing that. You want to have your wants versus needs listed. What are the members most vocal about? The existing deficiencies and challenge. A plan that is based upon replacing infrastructure is easier to sell to a membership, justifies the cost. You can't ever just promote something and say, we're restoring the course, give us $10 million. But if you can actually take that $10 million and justify 85% as infrastructure, you're good. Membership survey. Is an external factor requiring a change? Permitting. Is somebody wanting to put a walkway in within the right-of-way of the road? Are there safety concerns? Are practice facilities undersized, and enlarging them will have an impact on the golf course? Start every project with a goal statement. Sit down with your architect, hammer out what we want to accomplish in the end. Establishing a timeline. Financial condition of the club is going to dictate when you can do the work. Member expectations of what's going to happen while you're doing the work, whether they're willing to close it down or not. Today, it's all about availability. And if you call somebody and they say, yeah, I can be there tomorrow, red flag, especially right now, okay? Is permitting required? If yes, gain an understanding of what the governing body's allotted timelines are. Sometimes they don't even have to respond to your initial permit for 100 days. Understand that. Depending on the scope of the project, be creative with the schedule. Contractors like doing work in the summertime now. If you can convince your members to do that, be good. Understand what it really means to complete work over the winter. Talked about that a little bit. Build in flexibility for weather no matter the time of construction, and transparency with your members. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Educating the members, this should be wrapping it up right now. Never stop the communications. During the development of the plan, give playing groups an opportunity to be heard, town hall meetings, anything you can do to allow them to ask questions. Meet the architect evenings, these are becoming popular. Present the plan to the members, share plans and graphics around the clubhouse. During construction, as long as it's not a liability issue, conduct tours and events to engage the membership with the architect. And then video updates from the triumvirate, the pro, GM, and superintendent, throughout the planning and construction process, updating the members of what's going on. With that, thank you. That was a lot of questions. Any questions? We'll go back to the end. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Earlier in your presentation,
Okay.
Kind of doing that now.
When you have a great,
He's a player.
so the question, if anybody couldn't hear, it was just, I mentioned widening fairways multiple times. What's the reasoning behind that? If you have a great old classic golf course, okay, things are going to be built around the premise of strategy, risk and reward, okay? If your bunkers are sitting out where that TV is, but your fairway is where this platform is, they're not married together, okay? Widening fairways starts to bring hazards and fairways together. I was on a tour with USGA many years ago. Dave Otis said, Jim, our philosophy is the shortest cut of grass as close to the hazards as possible. That might mean widening fairways, that might be pulling some bunkers in closer, but the idea is to get those closer together. I also mentioned during the presentation about starting on a classic course, or any course really, starting the design at the green and coming your way back, which creates angles of play. You want to be on the left side if a green opens up and runs away from you. You don't want to be on the right. If it's all rough, you're not giving the player the option to try and attack those angles. So it really is building on the foundation of sort of this risk-reward strategy, variety, all of that. Yes, sir?
What's your recommendation to make a membership understand through tree management, distinction between hardwoods and evergreens, and the impact of evergreens on the course? And while you were created much after Philadelphia, I feel that somebody had 4,000 evergreen little saplings in our course and went out there and put this up ad hoc later by exactly that. Greens committees that were doing ad hoc and not respecting the architect. We're working with an architect now, and I'm struggling to explain to the membership that he actually knows much more about what golf course architecture should be than you. And the idea of I love having trees is to go to the forest. This is a golf course. We want to obviously make this golf course something and unveil it so it can be its full potential. But the biggest struggle I'm having as the Greens chair is explaining to people why evergreens are bad, opening up our sight lines, creating very dramatic vistas, and it's, you know, Oakmont, just looking at Walter Stroll, looking at the playing field, what they're doing in Essex County right now with the Gil Hansen, So, what's your advice to how I approach this with our membership?
Documentation. I don't want, if you're working with an architect, I don't want to step on their toes.
Well, it's-
My philosophy, if I may.
Just in terms of hardwoods versus evergreen.
Okay, one, high surface roots, okay? Unless we get into the whole idea of silver maples, this and that, but if we're talking evergreen versus deciduous. High surface roots, play the ball as it lies, okay? Issue. Two, weak wooded. Wind and snow will break up white pines pretty quickly. Three, canopy density. They do not allow for grass to grow underneath those trees themselves, okay? That's just where to start. How to communicate that? Anybody in this room, you can go to a place called historicaerials.com. If you can navigate historicaerials.com, I'm giving away a trade secret here. If you can navigate through there, you might be able to find photographs from the 40s, 50s, 60s, every decade through, and you can track what planting was done. And it was just like I said earlier, I guarantee you that not until the 1990s did people actually consider where they were planting a tree.